characteristic is it's not a question, therefore, of if you're going to partner in addressing complex issues, it's when you're going to partner. You're going to be working with those players in the Venn diagram, whether you like it or not, and if you don't know they're there, shame on you for your ignorance. You have to engage across spheres and across sectors of society if you seek to have any kind of enduring impact. And this is my recommendation to the president or any leader. You've got to operate at the nexus of that Venn diagram. You have to be a catalyst for communities of the willing, state and non-state government and non-government, public and private, to bring these things together to tackle these things right here. There's no way to do it unless you work together and unless you're willing to listen and learn and do the heart of religious freedom, which is respect, so you can reintroduce yourself and move past stereotypes and engage and reconcile spheres and issues, but also national identities and state identities. The process of partnership takes place from collaboration, which is tactical, naked self-interest, you scratch my back, I scratch yours, all the way through coordination where there's legal expectations and there's a expectation and norms, memorandum of understanding and those kinds of things. And as you do so, the most important thing to understand is that bottom parenthetical, which is a mantra for us. First understand, then engage. First know how to love, and then go forth. One brief example from Asia. When we first started engaging Vietnam, I had a senior officer from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he came up to us after the first day of meeting. He says, "You're the first Americans not to give me a list and tell me what to do." And I said, "I'm sorry. That doesn't excuse how your country's treated Christians, by the way, but it doesn't excuse how we've treated you personally." People want to be respected. People want to be listened to. This is not rocket science. But we have not done this as a nation, and we are viewed as arrogant without the capacity to listen. So if you're going to be in the reintroduction business, what we have found is that you've got to start with self-interest before you move into values, and then you move into agreements. This is a group of scholars that we brought together at Lake Issyk, which is about 3 hours east of Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan. And what you see there are the leading experts on international affairs and religion from 4 of the 5 Central Asian countries, the leading experts from China, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and the leading experts from Russia. And we're talking about religion and international affairs. Now, another sad metric, this kind of conference has never taken place before. The comment from the senior guy from China said, "I've been to so many conferences and with these participants, with these countries represented, and I've never talked about religion." How could you not talk about religion if you're engaged in Central Asia, which is the feeder for terrorism, or a feeder for terrorism? And what do you say when you have these conversations? How do you convince these folks to think about it? And you should be aware, too, if you're trained in international relations, as I am, and as these people are, there's no place in your world for religion. It's not an analytical factor. That's a cultural thing. That's something we don't do. And most of them are communist or former communist. So you're twice removed from reality. You're a communist who has no place for religion, according to doctrine and Karl Marx, etc., and then you're trained in international affairs. Nothing against international affairs professors out in the audience. But traditional international affairs have not been trained to account for religion. So you're starting twice removed from reality in a deep hole, and you're trying to create a space where we can say, religion can be a part of the solution if you let it. Minority faiths will contribute to social stability if you let them. They will alleviate financial burdens on the state if you let them look after the least and the lost and the last and the homeless and the orphan and the poor. They'll pay taxes. They'll be good citizens. And most of all, as most of these countries transition into market economies, they'll act as a moral bulwark against corruption. I've had Chinese and communist officials say to me, we need the Christians and we need the faith because we have a corruption problem that's so crazy we don't know what to do with it. So you harness their self-interest. You say, we need to find ways to talk about this. And you smart people from throughout Eurasia, you've got to find ways to start articulating this because you're the advisors. The politicians are only as good as their talking points. And the politicians, to be fair to them, are going through on-the-job training with religion and international affairs just like we are. We have to be smarter. We have to make this advice available. And once you get past common self-interest, maybe you can begin to get into common values. I love this picture because they're all dear friends of mine, except the woman in the middle. She was the curator. This is taken in, this is a curator of a museum in Ingushetia in the Northern Caucasus, where we took a field group to study the pros and cons of dealing with religion in Chechnya. Ingushetia is right across the border, just north of Chechnya. The woman on the left is Martha Brill-Olcott. She's America's #1 Central Asia expert. In her own words, she's a quasi-practicing secular Jew. I don't know what that means, but we always have good conversations, and I respect the heck out of her. She works at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Next to her is Wang Hong. She works for the Institute of Ethnic Minority Groups at the State Council in China. She's atheistic. She has to be. But she's interested in this stuff. She knows that she has a problem in her western borders with extremism, as all countries do. And extremism is coming out of Central Asia. How do you deal with that? Zaino in the black shirt. Zaino Baran, Sufi background, top scholar at the Hudson Institute. And then Pauletta Otis, Christian, top anthropologist from the Marine Corps University in Quantico. And so you have women in security, which is awesome because most of these societies are patriarchal and they've never encountered a woman who can speak with authority, and it's just fun to watch. And they're respected because of their knowledge. But then you get into issues like, well, what about our kids, which happens with mothers? And what about the values that we share together as women doing professional things and women in academia? And this creates a different kind of ripple effect as you seek to influence and change mindsets. Now, the last part about religious freedom, remember we've talked about religion as part of the problem, moving into part of the solution because we're trying to reintroduce ourselves according to the best of our faith and the respect and those kinds of lessons that we learned from the Rhode Island Colonial Charter of 1663. But the amazing thing about Christ as you read the Gospels is that the principles he lays out, like at John 4, like love your neighbor, those principles are amazing because they're also practical. They work in the most difficult places. And if my faith isn't real in the Northwest Frontier Province of Pakistan, why in the world would I dare to practice it in the Christian kumbaya cocoon of suburban America? It has to be relevant in both places. This is a conference we did this May on peace and religion. It's the first conference in the history of the Northwest Frontier Province that brought together the minority faiths of that region. If you don't know, Northwest Frontier Province is 99% conservative Pashtun Muslim. And they're Pashtun first. As one of my friends said to me, we've been Pashtun for 3,000 years, Muslims for 1,400 years, and Pakistanis for 60. Think that one through. That's the kind of thing you have to do if you're going to listen and understand before you engage. But we had a conference in Peshawar last May, and it was marked by the fact that Sikh, Hindu, Shia, and Christian were allowed to participate. In the audience were the top 40 imams from the province, not all of them educated. In the there's 3 universities in the province, and we had all the student leaders there. You know what the metric of success was? Is that when the Shia and the Sikh and the Hindu and the Christian spoke to their fellow Pakistani brothers and imams, they all took twice their podium time. It's the first time they were ever allowed to share that their faith is not a threat to them. All the minorities live in fear. They don't know what the Pashtun culture is going to do. The Pashtun people are an amazing, hospitable people. But there are different dynamics that are at play between old Al-Qaeda and new Al-Qaeda, old Taliban and new Taliban, and you're not quite sure what new Al-Qaeda and new Taliban are going to do. And a lot of them are sawing people's heads off, and minorities are living in fear. And they were given a space under the auspices of Chief Minister Durrani to share that they were brothers in humanity and fellow Pakistanis, and just as proud of their country and their province as the Pashtuns. That only came about because we invested 2 years in relationships to have that conference. Did you hear about that in the news? No. Here's something else you probably didn't hear about. If you can see this is the cornerstone for a church at Peshawar University. Pakistan is an Islamic republic. It's against the law to build a church. There was a church from Peshawar University from the British Raj, and it had fallen into disrepair. And Chief Minister Durrani, our friend that we built these relationships with, pro-Sharia, anti-American officially, in December 19th, 2006, he went and laid the cornerstone to refurbish this church at Peshawar University, at a state-run university that was Islamic. And then he put $50,000 in government money down to make sure that church got rebuilt. Did you hear that story in the press? And when the Sharia courts reviewed it, they let it go because it was the chief minister who did it. Christians are 100,000 people in Northwest Frontier Province, 0.04% of 20 million Pashtuns. Do you think this sent a signal about respect? Unprecedented precedent. If you take your faith seriously and dare to live it out on the cruel edges of the world, you can reintroduce yourself as a Christian who happens to be American, and then have practical impact because you are reconciled to your neighbor whom you are called to love in a language and logic that they understand. It ain't easy. And the metrics are going to be weird, but it is possible. Now I want to conclude by saying, just in case you thought I was some touchy-feely Christian guy going out there and kumbaya and trying to find trees to hug. This is not anything new. It's not new according to the history of the United States of America. It is not new according to Scripture. But I also want you to know that this is not new according to classic art and science of grand strategy, in terms of how great powers engage the world and the thought that is out there and the body of knowledge that is out there that informs how great powers do this and act on a global stage. Liddell Hart, he's a British strategist. If you're at a war, you're always thinking about the peace that you seek. And the peace must be something that allows for the hard power of fighting and winning the combat, but also the aftermath. We have some experience with this right now. Hard and soft power are reconciled together. It makes sense. Robert Gates, does everybody know who Robert Gates is? He's our Secretary of Defense. The Secretary of Defense is saying the same exact thing that Liddell Hart said and saying the same exact thing that Roger Williams said. Military success is not sufficient to win. A rule of law, promoting reconciliation, governance, and basic services to people. They go together, this hard and soft power thing. And the ability to be in a place to do these things, you have to be in relationship to the people who actually live there. You have to show them respect. You have to listen and understand their culture, and then find ways to come alongside the good leaders that are already there. Some of them are Christian. Some of them will not be Christian. And you have to be comfortable with that too. Isaiah 45 and Cyrus. God will use whom he wants to for his purpose. And then just to quote an American, because we got to throw one of those guys in. Chuck Hagel said this at the Council of Foreign Relations in May of this year. Great nations engage. Great nations engage because they believe in who they are. They engage because they are strong. They engage because they are secure in their beliefs. They know who they are, and they're not threatened by other alternative views because they're strong in their identity. And we are strong in our identity because of what took place in Rhode Island. That is who we are. We show respect for our neighbor, we're comfortable in our own faith, and we're not threatened by other people and other views. In fact, we celebrate those other views and express respect for them because they're also made in the image of God. This is my last slide. And I want to say something particular to the students here. I mean, we're all students, but for the students who are paying tuition at a college called Calvin. Christians are presupposed and prepositioned to have impact in this world. We are now living in a global age. Christ invented globalization with Go Ye. This is what was intended and how it's been thought about from the beginning in Genesis 1 and 2 before the fall. A holistic understanding of how things relate to one another. And all those players are going to be there. You're presupposed because if you have a kingdom theology, you think holistically and you think that God is sovereign and you know that God is sovereign and you know that He's there. And the question you have to ask yourself is not what would Jesus do? It's an important question, but it's sometimes a question for people who have too much time on their hands in an affluent society. I've never met anybody in the developing world who asks, what would Jesus do? What is Jesus doing? And how can I come alongside that? That is the precious gift that we're called to. But do not go and try to help out with what Jesus is doing unless you have first learned how to love. If you can't love, don't go. But the call is great, the time is great, and we're at a very interesting point in American history and global history. People still respect America. Americans still think they ought to be engaged in the world. But we've never been thought of more poorly by non-Americans. This is the time to reclaim the very best of who we are as a state that allows for religious freedom, a state that allows for religious freedom precisely because of the Christian values that were present when it was founded. Thank you.
We do have just a couple of minutes for questions. There are a couple of microphones here if people would be inclined to ask a question.
This is about access. What type of access does the Religious Advisory Council have to the President? How frequently and what type of access?
The Religious Advisory Council?
The Religious Advisory Committee.
Of?
It said on your description that you serve on that committee.
I'm on the Religious Advisory Committee to the President of the Council on Foreign Relations, not the President,
Okay.
Big Daddy, W. So your question was about access and how to the, do you mean our own government or into closed societies?
2 hours.
We have pretty good access. You know, when Chief Minister Durrani came, we got him meetings with the National Security Council, the State Department, et cetera, et cetera. Whenever we go into a country like Vietnam or Pakistan, we don't go preaching religious platitudes or Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 18 and freedom of conscience. What we try to demonstrate is if we work together, we will find ways to make you look good in your own country and give you the access to influence. So in some ways, in a political science speak, there's track 1 and track 2. Track 1, state to state. Track 2, people to people. We're like track 1.5 because we're people to people officially, but we have access at very high levels on the track 1 side, and we can get those meetings and set them up. So that actually allows us to leverage, as a small Christian NGO, our impact in a foreign country because those foreign people will have access themselves that they otherwise would not have had. And I would also say back to the council, we're also shaping center-left, center-right think tanks who've never talked about religion. The Council on Foreign Relations is now going to have a whole part of its website on religion international affairs. It's not just because of me and IGE, but we've been with it since the beginning because we were one of the very few people and organizations thinking about it and talking about it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One more question.
Am I on? Yeah. I'm wondering if our present conception of a separation of church and state in this country has not hindered us from thinking more along these lines. I'm wondering if you can make a comment on that.
Yeah. The perception is this, that Bush views himself as a religious leader with access to God. And many of Bush's quotes get misinterpreted. You know, like the quote about the Iraq War where he said, I listened to it. Do you listen to your father, George Herbert Walker Bush, and President